Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
And a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human.
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture.
And what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. We are continuing our theme of talking about how we can transform heartbreak into healing, which is the one of the themes of the book. We have two authors with us today, Betty and Kyle Mertens. They're the authors of the book Unraveled, When Loss Changes Everything, and the children's book Never Far Apart, as well as the co-founders of the nonprofit Ella's Umbrella, which raises funds for pediatric heart research. As a side note, Betty and I also know each other from work.
That's right.
And it has, been a delight getting to know you as a friend as well. And in that interaction, I knew, because of your openness and your just candor in the way that you kind of move through the world and share, who you are and your story, that you guys would be wonderful guests on the podcast. So.
Thank you.
I was going to tell, before we get into, because this is going to be, it's a heavy topic, but before we kind of maybe have a slightly lighthearted moment, before we get into the heavy topic, which was how I know that you're so open-hearted was just like the way that we sort of met. So we met at, work happy hour, and then we chatted a little bit. And then the next time we saw each other, we were literally in a stairwell, and Betty is like, "Hey, what are you doing later?" And I'm like, I don't know. And you're like, "You want to hang out?" It's like, "Yeah, I do." And I'm like, "This person's so interesting." And as somebody who's obviously just like trying to be in life, like I am here to, be connected to other people. And, and then Kelley, I think you were going to share something.
Yeah. And so that, I guess it was probably that day
after
you guys had lunch or something. So we have like a little, text chain with four friends. And Erin came home that day and she texted us. She goes, "Guys, I think I made a real friend at work today." Yeah. And we all, of course, hearted it. And I was like, it was so, again, like, tender-hearted. It was so glad you guys are friends. Yeah. I think I made a real friend at work today. It's like, that's like your first grader coming home and being like, "Mom, yay, I made a friend."
I love that. I'm positive that I went home and I was like, "Oh my gosh, Kyle, I met the coolest person."
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Awesome.
So we're so glad to have you guys here.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess maybe where we should start with this episode is if you guys want to kind of share your story about your daughter, and then I thought maybe we could get into a little bit about learning about your backgrounds, but I think maybe having the backdrop about your story is going to be hopefully a helpful entry point into having these conversations.
We have 3 children, and one of them passed away right before her first birthday, and it was a complete shock to us. So her name was Ella, perfectly healthy, normal childhood. She went to all of her doctor's checks, and it wasn't like we had any kind of sign that she was a sickly child. And then just right around her first birthday, she got what we thought was a cold. She was kind of wheezing and lethargic, and so we took her in and we were like, "Oh no, what if it's RSV?" And then they tested her and they said no. And we're like, "Whew, all right, well, she's going to get better." But she didn't get better. She kind of, the wheezing continued. And I remember calling the pediatrician because in the ER, they're like, "We think she's okay. We're going to release her. Just,
Yeah, and follow up with your pediatrician on Monday. This is on like Sunday, so like the next day.
Yeah, so I gave the pediatrician a call, and Ella was sitting on my lap. And I said, "Yeah, she's sick," and I explained what happened. And I said, they told me to schedule a follow-up visit, and the nurse said, "Wait a minute, is that her wheezing that I hear in the background?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, put the phone up to your daughter. So I put it up to her, and she could hear Ella kind of wheezing, and she said, I want you to stop what you're doing and come in right now. And so that was like, for me, actually, the very first, like, whoa, this is maybe something I need to be more concerned about than a common cold. Yeah. So we went in and they checked her O2 level, and she was not getting enough oxygen. So they had us go to the hospital in an ambulance. And from there, we still didn't know what was going on with her. It took them a little while to figure out that it was actually an issue with her heart. And so we were in Children's Hospital for a couple weeks. And I mean, you're the detail guy. Maybe it wasn't a couple weeks. It felt like a couple months, but.
Yeah, it was a couple. So we were at one hospital. They thought she had pneumonia. They were treating her for some kind of an infection like that. After a day, nothing was getting better. So they're like, we need to send you to Children's because they'll be better equipped to figure out what's going on. So then we were at Children's Hospital for around 2 or 3 weeks. And then she was doing better. And so they discharged us, and we had like a couple days a week follow-ups to kind of just check things and make sure everything was still tracking the right way.
Yeah, what they could tell is that her heart was enlarged. So dilated cardiomyopathy. But what they thought was that a virus had kind of gotten into her heart, and that she was going to recover. And what they didn't know, and what we didn't find out until like 6 weeks post-mortem for her, was that she actually had a very rare genetic defect that caused her heart to get stretched out in a way where she really needed a heart transplant. We just didn't know that. And so anyway, back in time to where we thought she was getting better, she was at home, and she was still kind of like weak and tired, but we thought she was on the road to recovery. And then on Kyle's 30th birthday, we took her into daycare, and her lips started turning blue, and we told them to call 911. Rushed to meet her at the hospital. They were going to airlift her to Children's, and she did not make it into the helicopter. So it really flipped our world upside down. And the Scylla story.
30?
Yep.
30. I mean, so you guys are so young when this happened.
Yeah. And she was our whole world. I mean, anyone who has children understands that, like, your world kind of stops when you have a baby, and you kind of relearn to do everything, and it all revolves around this tiny human. And so the day that we went home from the hospital and realized that we had like empty crib, empty car seats, and because it was just such a shock, not anything that we could mentally prepare for.
Right.
It did turn our world upside down completely, and nobody knew what to say in those moments. And I think that's the tough thing when a tragedy like this happens, is that there's nothing that anyone can say to make it better. Yeah. And so it's just kind of like everyone is uncomfortable, and it's sort of like radioactive, like this thing that no one really can do anything about. Oh.
Well, and I think that is the origin then with that last piece of what you said, this feeling of this is a radioactive topic. And I think, I'm married to someone who's in medicine and who deals with death all the time. And that's one thing that I have learned about being in that relationship, that I was uncomfortable talking about death. And then it was being in that relationship that made me realize, no, this is a part of life. And it's a part of life that, especially in American culture, that we have sort of outsourced to other parties, the hospital system, the bereavement system, the funeral homes, like it's like, take this problem and deal with it, where we don't engage in this loss with any kind of intimacy that it needs, that it requires. And that's part of the reason I think that your book is so powerful, and the way that the both of you communicate is that you are able to invite people into a conversation in a way that it doesn't feel so scary. It feels very human. And also as I was reading the book, the thing that struck me was like, this is not just a good guide for people who have lost someone that they love. This is a good guide for anybody who has lost anything that means something to them. Yeah. It's a guide for moving through difficult moments, and how do you how do you transform those moments of loss into something that, you know, is valuable to yourself, but also to other people. And there's just so few people that are able to do that. And so, I mean, we're so grateful for you guys to be on the podcast and to be sharing with us.
Well, thanks. I feel like what you just described right there is 100% what led us to put some of these things down in writing, because in the moments that followed Ella's death, I feel like Kyle and I we realized in a new way how powerless we are to change things that we care about. Or, I mean, you would trade places with your daughter in a heartbeat if you could save her. And it's just, things happen that are outside of what we would choose and outside of what we control all the time. And when that happens and things go off the rails, what do you do about it? And so, because we have had this frame of reference, I feel like we have now somehow earned the authority to show up in epically awful moments with people. And so, I mean, it's not something we would have chosen, but it's kind of like, you know, this is our reality. And so we're going to use this to the best of our ability. And it started with just having conversations with people that other people didn't know what to talk to, like what to say. Yeah. And they would say like, hey, would you mind talking to my friend? Or would you tell me what I should say or what I shouldn't say? And we were frequently either coaching others who were trying to support those who were grieving, or we had a lot of opportunities to just sit down one-on-one with other folks and listen to them and help them process and kind of reflect and share some of our stories to help them come up for air in these really heavy moments. And it's not just death. It's also, we had a friend who was going through a divorce that he didn't choose. And
exactly.
So I think it's anything like that, where it's like, man, this is not something that you saw coming, and now you need to deal with your new reality, and we can, let's figure this out together.
That's something almost, I mean, every person is going to experience in their lifetimes. Not, you know, I mean, everyone is going to experience loss. And whether that, and I think the way that you just described it is like, it's like, this is something that was unchosen, and is my new reality. And now how am I going to deal with it? I think that is a theme that resonates for so many people. I wondered about, as I was, and you guys, you know, it sounds like, so you were writing a journal together. And that was because one of the things that's so amazing about your story is, it almost brought you closer in some ways in your marriage, which as I understand the statistics, for most couples that lose a child, it is like the end of their relationship. And that's one of to be able to transform loss in that way, like that. I mean, people that would desire a lot of help, I'm sure, around that. But I'm curious about, like, how did you move through that? And you know, was it the journal that prompted the book? That's kind of what it's as I read it, that's what I thought was. So I don't know. That's a terrible way of phrasing this question. I've asked you multiple things. And,
So I think your initial point on how you have some kind of a tragedy and it tears marriages apart and they separate. And I think we've seen that happen to other people. And I think one of the key things is they're both going on their own path on how they're figuring out how to deal with it. And so we wanted to be intentional about how we dealt with it. And also we said to each other that we didn't want this to be something that tore us apart. And so when we journaled together, but really Betty was doing all the writing, and it was kind of more documenting our conversations as we were talking through where we were at, what we were thinking about, what was helpful. And that, I mean, and each of these things might spur off a topic or a story or some kind of a new idea. And so as we were kind of building out that journal, it ended up being something that we would use as kind of a reference tool as we were talking to somebody else that was dealing with a similar situation. And so one particular couple, we were talking with them, and they were sharing a story or how they're feeling, like, oh, we talked about that, and we find something similar in our journal, and kind of share how the thoughts that you're having on this topic and this area are very similar to what we did, and you're not weird for thinking that way, and trying to figure it out. But then each of these different topics all had a story. And so as we were kind of sharing the journal, they were like, I wish I could just have your journal to reference. And we're like, well, the journal doesn't really have any of the information, and it has
It's just messy bullet points.
Yeah.
there's a story behind each one of these things that we kind of have to narrate after we kind of share what it is. And so that sharing is how we kind of took it from what the journal was to trying to build it out into what the book was.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things that I would build. He mentioned the intentionality of kind of leaning into our relationship, and I cannot emphasize enough. So one of the things with people not knowing what to say when tragedy strikes, one of the things that a number of individuals said to us in an effort to be helpful is protect your marriage, because tragedies rip apart marriages.
Yeah, and you're like, great, thank you. That's all I need is one more thing
We were
to
like,
just be
Awesome.
totally afraid of.
If there's any one thing that we know, it is that we don't want our daughter's legacy to be ripping apart our marriage. And because we've never walked through this before and we are not experts, we're going to friggin' talk about it, and we're going to figure it out. And we refuse to let that happen to us. And so I think that mindset, that mental posturing was really helpful for us. And that is why we got the journal out, because it's kind of like, shoot, Kylie would love to listen to and watch videos of Ella. That was like something that helped him feel close to her. For me, that was like so triggering. It just made me feel homesick and sad.
Yeah.
So talking about things like that, like what is helpful to you and what is triggering to me and what is triggering to you, and how can I give you space to do the things that are going to be healing for you and also help me find space. And I think also you have these, we talk about this a lot with people who are grieving, that it is very unpredictable. Like we did not experience normal stages of grief. Like it kind of comes in crushing waves at the beginning. We talk about that a little bit. And then sometimes a wave will hit you out of nowhere. And when people are like, man, what should I say to my friend who's grieving? I'm like, oh my gosh. If there was a perfect thing to say to anyone, they might need something different from you this morning than they do tonight. Like each person is kind of in a different spot. So I think just intentionally talking about where you're at and what is helpful to you. And so all of that stuff kind of became this journal. It was a very organic way, raw way for us to kind of protect our marriage as we were walking through it. And then it was the smartest thing we did, because it created this record of a time when, honestly, when I try to think back to those first few months after we lost her, it's kind of like,
yeah, you just have to be in shock.
It is total shock. It is total shock. There were moments where I just don't even remember. People will say like, "Oh yeah, I was there at her memorial." I'm like, I don't remember.
Yeah,
I don't remember that they were there.
Out of body experience.
It's crazy. And so having the real time notes in that period, and we also documented some memories of her and some things like that. I feel like if we were to say one thing to someone who's going through a tragedy, it would be like, just write some stuff down. It doesn't have to be Dear Diary. It doesn't have to be perfect. Write some notes for yourself to help process even your own thoughts. But for us, if you're in a couple, that was really, really helpful to us. And it did become the backbone of the book that we're sharing with others now.
What were some things that you can remember that were helpful that other people either, I don't know if there was anything that was helpful that people said, or just the way that people showed up for you? What were some of those helpful ways that people showed up?
I have thoughts on this too.
You can start.
Okay. So I think the trickiest part of that is that my answer to that question is very specific to me and who I am as a person.
Yeah.
Because things that people did for us, like our family helped us kind of move some of Ella's things to her room so that we could decide what to do. But when we came back, it wasn't like, there's her high chair. And to me, that felt very loving, and I know that was a hard thing for my loved ones to do for us. But in talking with other folks who are grieving, they had a similar experience where family members moved some of their things and they were
And that felt like an
appalled
intrusion. Yeah.
Oh,
because they felt like that's my thing to do. So that is the
why it's-
case in point why it's so difficult.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is universally, I think the most common thing for folks to say is, I'm so sorry. And I get that because it's like, man, when your heart is broken about something, you're like, man, I'm sorry that happened to you. I just can't even imagine. A lot of people say, I can't imagine. And even though those things aren't wrong to say, and I don't ever want to inspire guilt for someone who's trying to be helpful and supportive, it also puts the bereaved person in a spot to say, it's okay. You know, because when someone says, I'm sorry, you kind of naturally want to be like, it's okay.
Right.
But it's not okay. And so what I try to encourage people to do all the time is just show up in a way that says like, man, my heart is broken for you. Because then that allows the person to just feel like you're there with me.
Yeah.
And maybe a more helpful response to what you're asking is when we are put in positions where we're meeting up with people who are grieving, we don't have magic, perfect things to say. But a lot of what we do is listen. And I think folks frequently will say, like, I'm here if you need me. Like, just tell me what you need.
Yeah.
And what I can say from experience is that is helpful, but also I don't know what I need because I've never done this before and everything hurts. Like everything hurts and I just want something back that I can't have. And so you can't help me with that. So I don't know what else to ask for. But
Yeah, I think just on that topic of like, let me know what you need, and I think kind of expanding on that as well is right after you have a loss, like some kind of a tragedy happens. There's a whole bunch of people that are being supportive for the next week or maybe 2 weeks, and then as time kind of pushes out, everybody kind of goes back to their new normal. And that was one thing that we noticed is it's like, all right, we have our new normal that we would never choose, and everybody else is going back to their lives like nothing happened.
Yeah.
But I think
makes you sound bitter. We weren't
No,
bitter about
no.
it, but it was just this reality.
But something that I think if people want to know what can I do or what would be helpful, it's like,
Call me in 2 months.
yeah,
You know, like
3 weeks later, 2 months later, 6 months later, just
Hey, I'm checking,
follow up with them,
checking
see
in
how
on
they're
you.
doing, where they're at.
Yeah.
What can I do now? Like just knowing that people are still thinking about what you're going through and you're not kind of on your own island is a helpful thing. And it's not that there's one thing just to say, because if there was a paragraph that you could just make it all good, like that would,
Yeah.
oh, thank you for saying that. I'm no longer grieving.
Right.
You are just magical.
I
Right.
think giving options is really helpful. But if I give you an example of how we showed up for a friend who just recently had a late term miscarriage and had to go through the D&C process and all of that, and she was really wrecked. The situation around it really was truly a tragedy for this family, and our friend was just broken about it. And so we said, hey, we would love to get you guys dinner so you don't have to think about eating. And so then I just said, would you rather us, DoorDash something to you or make something for you and drop it off? Or would it be helpful to have other people around? And she said, I think having other people around. So then we showed up, we have the pizza, and then gave her a hug. She immediately broke down in tears when she saw us. And I said to her, I just want you to know that we love you so much and we want to be helpful to you. And I realize that you may not even know what you need from us right now, but this is what I want to say. If you need us to just treat you like normal, eat dinner, we can talk about normal things and you can have some like mental space, that is completely acceptable. We don't have to talk about the big heavy thing that you're dealing with. But I also want you to know that if at any moment you have a question or you want to talk about it, you are never going to make us feel uncomfortable. And we can seamlessly go back and forth into this messy moment with you based on what you needed at the second. And she was like, let's do that. I feel like that is the mental posture that I would recommend that people approach supporting grieving folks with is like,
Options. We can be agile.
Yeah.
We can do the emotional agility.
Yeah.
And kind of meet you wherever you are in any moment.
Yeah. And you're not
that's
going to make
really
us feel
helpful.
uncomfortable
And you're
because
not
I
gonna
think
make us feel uncomfortable.
the grieving people almost feel this like I am alone carrying this heavy thing because it is my burden to carry and no one else. I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. And then it's also mixed with folks don't know, like, should I bring it up? Should I not bring it up?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, should I?
Yeah.
And Kyle and I, we talk about, like, we're always thinking about it anyway. Like, you're not reminding us of something that we'd totally forgotten.
Yeah,
but
somebody said, well, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to make you guys sad. Like, oh, okay.
we're sad.
We're sad.
If you
We're
don't
sad
if you
and
don't
it's
mention
okay.
it, then that's right. I won't be sad about it. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well,
This-
sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, this is the quote in chapter 5. The intro is, for the rest of my life, there will be a part of me that is sad every day, and that's okay. And I thought, it's a really succinct and powerful way of saying just that. It's like, it's something that you're just going to carry with you every day, and it's going to make you feel sad. But it's also okay. Like, that's also part of
It's part of who
living.
we are.
Yeah.
I think it does not in any way diminish our ability to have joy and love. And I think that's the thing that it almost, in some ways, has brought more brilliance to the bright things in our lives because we have more depth and contrast that helps us appreciate that. So, I mean, if we could go back and change it, we would, but we can't. So we're going to soak all the good out of it that we possibly can because our lives are better because we had her. Like, now we are uniquely equipped to talk to people and have that, like, be a safe space. We are automatically a safe space for anyone who's gone through something awful. And it's because of Ella. And it's, I see that as part of her gift to the world, to us,
One other thing I was thinking about when you were just the what to say and that kind of topic, and more of like an advice to somebody that's grieving is thinking less about the words they're saying and just acknowledging that they're doing their best to be a support for you.
Yeah.
We had some people say some kind of crazy things like, oh, you're young, you can have more kids. Like, oh, thank you. That's
really
really
helpful.
But he didn't know what to say. He said something, kind of put his foot in his mouth, and
And I don't
we realized that he was just trying to be a support and help us, even if the specific words were not exactly helpful.
Yeah.
Another just practical thing that I frequently will tell people when they reach out and say, like, what should I do? I want to do something. A lot of folks at the beginning gave flowers, which was amazing. I would not want anyone who sent us flowers to hear this and be like, oh, I did the wrong thing. Her memorial was so beautiful, and we are so thankful for all of that. But I remember with brutal clarity the day that all the flowers died. And because I walked into my home and it smelled like a funeral home. And Kyle was talking about how, like, everyone else kind of goes back to their normal life, and our life is never going to be the normal that we thought it was going to be. And that was the moment for me when I walked in and I was like, all the flowers are dead. Like, I need to throw all of these very meaningful arrangements away and keep moving on. And everyone else is moving on.
Yeah.
And so when something happens to someone that I care about, I am much more inclined to give them something like self-care, like go buy a Lush box or something like that has all kinds of, like, shoot, this is going to be a heavy time and you are going to be friggin' falling apart, but, like, take a bubble bath and use some lotion or whatever. I mean, it depends on the person and what they like, but I feel like I'm more inclined to do things like that will have some staying power and also just, like, practical for when the flowers die, like.
One thing that we've talked about and that you guys have shared is about, and this kind of goes back to, like, that the way that you've been able to embrace life, and it's given it in some ways more brilliance because of the contrast that you guys take every year a trip in honor of Ella and as a way to, like, to celebrate her life and your family and how she has transformed the way that you kind of move through the world. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, part of this is, so I mentioned very early on that we have 3 kids. And we never want our other 2 children to feel like they are somehow less loved. Or, I mean, like we throw a big trivia night for Ella, and we just launched a nonprofit called Ella's Umbrella. And I think we both had concerns when we had our other kids, like, man, we don't want this to be a cringy topic, and we don't want them to feel any less special. We want them to feel like our whole family is enriched because of Ella, and she's part of their lives and our lives, and she is part of what taught us the importance of making memories in the time that we have. And so, yeah, every year we pick a fun place that our family would like to go. Like this past year, we went to Great Wolf Lodge, which is like a big indoor water park, and we called that our Ella trip. And so our hope is that year over year, and we're always going to make a memory, like a picture book of the Ella trip for the year that the kids can look back on. And year over year, we're hoping that this is just something that, I mean, she's ingrained in our story, and she is helping us make new memories and value the time we have together. And maybe when they have their own families, they'll continue to do an Ella trip with their families, even apart from us. So anything else you would add to that, Kyle?
Well, yeah, I think just you made the comment about making sure she's ingrained in our kids' lives, and that's kind of the topic of the kids' book, is how we can kind of keep her memory, even though our other two kids were born after and never met her. But as you're kind of going through that, I was thinking about, we were driving somewhere, and a song came on the radio, the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance.
Just kind of like melancholy song.
And I was like, it's a kind of I don't know if the kids are really going to be. So I kind of skipped ahead, and Lane, our 3-year-old, goes, I liked that song. It reminds me of Ella.
Yeah, it made me think of Ella. And we were just like, huh.
Okay, well, we can go listen to the whole thing.
There wasn't really anything specific about it, but I think she just has this like...
Yeah, that she's present. Well, tell us a little bit more about the kids' book, because it's such a remarkable work.
Yeah, I think a common follow-up after we released this, and honestly, just after talking with grieving people, a common question that they ask us is, man, how do you handle this with your kids? Because it is such a heavy topic, and we have found some really, not just the Ella trip, but other creative ways throughout the year. Like we have a special ornament that we hang that's our Ella ornament, and the kids always kind of get excited about that. And every year Children's Hospital does a Beads of Courage ceremony for anyone who went through the Heart Center, was involved in that Beads of Courage program and passed away. And so we always get invited to that, and we light a candle for Ella. And we have a tree that someone gave us that's like our Ella tree that flowers every year and makes us think of her. And so I think finding those positive things that make us stop and reflect and remember that she was actually here.
Yeah.
So that we don't forget that. And also ways with our kids that we can kind of engage and bring her into the present, even though she's not physically here anymore. Yeah. We've kind of talked about it a lot with folks, but I was saying to Kyle, like, man, I really think there is an opportunity. There are not a lot of great kid grief books out there. I say that. I mean, there are kid grief resources, but a lot of them are that very melancholy, and I won't name any because I'm not trying to slam on anything, any other ideas. But what we thought is, man, we truly believe that our lives were not ruined because we lost her. We believe that they are enriched because we had her. And our family is a little bit more special because of her, you know? And so how do we take this and communicate this in a way that feels safe and engaging and could help other parents talk to kids about this very heavy topic? And so that is what led us to, it all rhymes, and it has some of those themes kind of woven into it. Oh, funny side story. We were going to name the book Woven because the Unraveled book, and we were thinking, oh man, wouldn't that be so clever if the kids' book was called Woven, because it is how we have woven Ella into our story. So then we asked our kids about it. And we said, Ryder, do you know what woven means? And he's like, nope, already know. He was
4.
4 at the time, yeah. And then we asked Lane, and she said, oh, I know what that means. It's after you wave to someone. You have woven. So we're like, okay, cool. We're not naming the kids' book that. This is not age-appropriate language, I guess. I don't know. If it doesn't resonate with our kids, it's probably not.
Yeah.
But
So the book is called Never Far Apart.
Never Far Apart.
It has that kind of woven, it's
And we did
threads are still-
pull in the word weaving or woven on the back cover, like just kind of for our own. Oh, actually, it's on the dedication page too. It says, for dedicated to Ella, who's forever woven into our story. So
It sounds like the things that you, all these kind of touch points that you've created, and ways that you've woven Ella into your life and your children's lives, there are these rituals. Even like the trip is kind of a little pilgrimage, and even like reading a book to your children, is this kind of ritual thing. And as the theist part of this conversation, I wonder if you wouldn't mind if we asked about your spiritual kind of lives in terms of how you were raised and how losing Ella in that way, how that affected that for you.
do you want to start?
Sure. So I guess from a background growing up, we'd go to church every once in a while, but it wasn't like every Sunday thing. It wasn't, we're volunteering, and like that was like a pillar of our family, if you will. Stopped going after a while. I kind of was just weird. I don't know. I just kind of felt like the family was indifferent about the topic, and I guess more agnostic, where it's like, could be, couldn't be. I don't know. Kept growing up, and then kind of got back into going to church again after me and Betty started to date and hang out, and so that's kind of a little bit of the background of how that's progressed. Is we still go to church and kind of go that direction.
I think it really was an interesting filter when we were dealing with the tragedy. So my background, Southern Baptist, so very conservative upbringing, very much about the rules. And I think that provided a strong foundation, but also in some ways kind of almost like put me in a bubble. And things that I didn't really question, not because I wasn't smart enough to question them, but just because no one really asked me the question. Never really occurred to me until I started probably getting into college. So I actually did go to a conservative Christian college.
High
That's
five
right.
there. High
Yeah,
five
that's
there.
right. That's right. I was the student body president, first female ever.
100% believe that.
Fellow students that I was friends with were like, listen, we honestly feel like you would do the best job, but we can't vote for you because we really want to see men in leadership. And I was like, you vote where your heart is, girlfriend. I feel you, but very conservative. And so then graduating from there, and I do have a degree in Bible because everyone had a degree in Bible, and also communications and marketing. So then I met Kyle in an MBA class, and I feel like something that has always been very engaging to me about Kyle is that he thinks and communicates with a lot of clarity. And he does ask very good questions. And I remember we were doing some premarital counseling, and one of the resources they were having us read said something like, every marriage needs to have a strong foundation of faith to be successful. And Kyle said, do you actually believe that that's true? And I was like, I mean, yeah, I think any marriage is going to be stronger if it's built on this foundation of, and I gave that very churchy answer. And Kyle said, "So do you think that my parents' marriage isn't healthy?" And I was like, I think your parents' marriage is very healthy. I think I just need to rethink what I was saying. I just think things like that were kind of
Right.
Yeah.
And so tying into then walking through this tragedy,
Yeah.
I think my Sunday school faith was not enough to get me through
Yeah.
a trauma of this magnitude. And I think things that should have or in the past would have provided a sense of comfort, like she's in heaven. All of a sudden, I had a million questions about heaven. I was no longer operating from this mindset of like, it's all going to be great. And I was wondering, like, will my daughter recognize me? How old will she be? Like what? Like I just all these things that all of a sudden made it, and very deep philosophical things, like, and I talked to Kyle about this too. Like, I do not have a way to contextualize good when there's not a bad to give that juxtaposition. Like I can only fathom good in context of bad. And so all good and no bad in heaven seems like a whiteout to me. Like, and so the more I started asking those things, I feel like Kyle, even though he came from a different background, he frequently would kind of ground if I was spiraling into like questions that would make me like really think a lot about eternity and all these different things. He would say like, I think it's kind of like a baby in the womb. Like, do they understand why they have feet? Like they can't, because there's context that there's missing. So he would just kind of bring up like, is it possible that maybe it's like that? Like there are pieces of the puzzle that you're missing now, and that maybe they'll make more sense when you get there. You can't know all of this. And I'm like, actually, that makes a lot of sense, husband. Thank you very much.
Well, and I think also on that kind of topic where it's like, why do bad things happen to people? Why do like all of this kind of stuff? And to your comment about like, is everything just white and perfect in heaven? Well, if you don't have a life that has bad things happening in it, that's a contrast that you can actually appreciate how good something else is, then is it actually good? Because you don't have anything to rate it against. So it's kind of just as we're kind of...
But it has been interesting. I think I still do identify as a theist, and I do believe that my daughter had a soul, and that her body died, but that I don't believe that her soul died, and I don't understand all of that, and I don't try to speak above my pay grade with it, but. That has been something that has helped me get through. When we wrote our book, though, we realized, man, tragedies are really polarizing, I think, on the topic of faith for folks. And some people who had faith and went through something awful are like, there can't be a God if he would allow this to happen. And so when we were writing our books and trying to show up for people, we're like, man, this is not at all about, like, just think about how your person is in heaven, and that's going to make you feel better. We really approached it from no matter wherever you are. We're going to help you come up for air. And kind of.
Yeah, I wondered about that because as I was reading the book, it's not referenced, right? So you don't know reading the book, like, what is your background on faith, or that's just it's much more. And I assumed it was an intentional decision, right? To think about it from the perspective of like, okay, for any person that reads this, how can they read this and say, what are the things that I can do for myself, or if I'm in a couple with a partner, that we can do together, that are these like intentional habits of mind, way of thinking about things, way of approaching the tragedy and your connection to each other and other people. That is universal. That came through for me.
Because so many of those churchy aphorisms, right, are just not helpful.
No, and like I said,
damaging.
For me, it actually brought out like more anxiety about things that I didn't really have to think about them before because I didn't have that much of a reason to think about them. But now in a very concrete way, I'm like, I care deeply about these questions. And so.
And I love what you said earlier about earning the authority to sit with people in their grief. And I think, that feels, and to kind of bear, just to bear somebody's grief with them and just sit with them. And that is, to me, what a spiritual response is.
Yeah.
But
But I would say even people who don't identify as a theist,
100%
that desire to show up and be able to experience those moments, it does feel
human.
kind of human.
Yeah.
And when awful things happen, it is really difficult to try to like pick out good points about the, especially if it's something like you've just found out that you're not ever going to be able to have kids. And that was something really important to you. And you now have to adjust to this new reality. Sometimes the only thing that can be a breath of air in that moment is to realize that for the rest of your life, you have now purchased the authority to sit with other people who are in that situation that they wouldn't choose and be present with them in a way that others can't because you get it.
Yeah. There was one passage that I wanted to ask about, and this was in the comparison chapter. And there was a lot in the comparison chapter that we could get into. But one of the things I thought that was interesting was that the two of you were walking, and then Betty asked Kyle, sort of like, would you change lives with other people? And he was like, I need to think about this for a while before I can answer it. And I don't know if you want to share like your answer or how you kind of thought about that and thought about the way that people sort of compare their lives and losses.
Yeah, so that was in my chapter, but this was one of the conversations we had, obviously. So the way she phrased the question was like, would you trade lives? Not like, if you could have Ella back, would you?
Right.
Because that's yes, obviously, like, of course. But to me, I took the question as like trading lives. That's trading everything, and everything in your life is really kind of a accumulation of all the choices you've made since you were basically a kid. You chose things that you were interested in that made your choices on what you're going to be more interested in studying, which shows what direction you'd go in school, who you would have friends, who you like. So it was kind of like I have made a whole bunch of choices. Sometimes they were spur of the moment, sometimes they were intentional, but like my life has been shaped the way it is because of all these choices. And so to trade lives with somebody would be to just say, I want all the choices that you have made that I did not choose. So it's like, no, I think there's this dark spot in the middle of our life, but it's what I've always chosen, and I am where I am because I have chosen these. And it's kind of similar. Like you see somebody that's a professional athlete or a doctor, and you say, oh, I wish I was a doctor. Or, I wish I was a professional athlete. And you don't step back to look at how much time they spent in school to become a doctor and how much they didn't go out and have a good time with friends because they were studying every night, and you made choices not to study every night to have that as your career, and you did other things because those were your choices. Just like someone that trains and maybe they aren't naturally gifted as an athlete, but every athlete, professional athlete especially, that I've ever heard their backstory, they were dedicated to their trade and have worked that hard, and they made sacrifices in other ways to get to where they're at. And so if you're not willing to make the sacrifice to get the benefit at the end, then it's hard to kind of be naive and just say, I want that. Why can't I have that too? So that was kind of the thought process behind kind of trying to be happy with what you have because it is what you've chosen to have.
I think the other thing about comparison is that it's just so flawed. And I think that obviously Erin knows social media, everyone's comparing the bad of what they have to the good of what other people, but I think there's this thing that we have experienced where, and we've actually fell into this category ourselves, where when you're grieving something, you tend to compare to the grief of others around you. And I actually think part of it is a healthy way that you're like contextualizing just your space in the world. But for us, Kyle, being the insightful man that he is, he shared that when another mom and dad who had lost an infant were connecting and kind of saying, like, I know what it's like to lose a child because we had a late-term miscarriage. Different story than what I was sharing about earlier. And this was very early in our grief. And Kyle said, my instinct, even though obviously heartbroken for them and understands that that is very real grief, he said, I think my instinct was a little bit to feel like ours is different because I know what my daughter sounded like and what she smelled like. And so that it just feels like it hurts more. And then later he was talking to some other parents who'd lost a teenager. And he said, if he was being really honest, where his heart went was to think, but you had 13 or 14 years with your son, and we only got 1 year with our daughter. And then being very introspective about it, he said, you know what, I can't do that. Actually, that's inconsistent for me. And I can't always have the worst situation. And in reality, where this mom and dad who lost the baby late-term miscarriage, they never got to experience their baby, and they would have given anything, even to just hold their baby for a day.
Yeah.
We got her for a whole year. That we were able to have those experiences. And on the other side, this family that lost a teenager, it's like, man, they know what their son's favorite holiday was. They know who his friends were. They have all these special memories with him, and how much heavier that must feel that they're driving past his favorite restaurant. And we don't have that because she was so little. And so it's kind of like there are things that make everyone's grief is different. And so comparing grief is
futile.
Absolutely futile. And it also just doesn't help. So other than if you're sharing for the sake of connecting with others and having a deeper sense of empathy. So that was kind of an aha moment for us.
Justin, I'm really glad you DoorDashed these tissues because.
And now the joke is in the podcast.
That's good.
Yeah. You know, when you first described what it was like right after, and you said you felt, what was the term you used? Like not toxic, but radioactive. Thank you. Felt radioactive. And the word that came to mind when you said that was like this sense of isolation.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure, was just compounded all that grief. And yet everything that you've talked about since, and everything the way that you've transformed this grief is about connection. And I just find that really powerful and inspiring. And
I don't know that I've really thought about it in that way, but that is really a neat insight. And I like it.
About finding connection and helping other people find connection. And then also the nonprofit, which we haven't really talked that much about. But so what was sort of, where did the energy come to decide to do that? Kind of what are the goals of the nonprofit? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so originally we started also shortly after we lost her and realized that she actually had a heart condition that the doctors weren't aware of. We said, anything we can do to help other families from having the same tragedy we want to do. And one way is knowledge around these type of issues, then maybe this won't happen to another child. And so we started an endowment fund first with St. Louis Children's Hospital and pledged to raise $25,000. And then,
which felt ridiculous to us at the time. We're like, that's a very lofty sum that we've just committed ourselves personally to.
yeah.
And we kept rationalizing, well, we're not going to pay for college. She's always, like, we can just make payments, monthly payments.
Man.
$25,000. But go ahead.
So, so we started to raise money. We do a big trivia night every year. We've done some other events, and we have actually raised $100,000 now for her endowment fund. And so as we were doing more of these things, we had another nonprofit reach out to us and ask us if we wanted to partner with them for something they were looking at doing.
Yeah.
And we were like, yeah, that sounds like it'd be a really, really good idea, except for we don't actually have any money.
Because we give everything to Children's Hospital for research.
Everything we raise is donated to Children's. And so.
And we told them we don't have any kind of way to give people a tax receipt otherwise, because it's not like the Kyle and Betty nonprofit or something.
Right.
And so I made that joke, and she said, well, sounds like it might be time to set up a nonprofit. And she's the one, it's actually Jen Hinkle. I'm sure she'd be okay with me sharing this. She lost a son in a very similar way, similar age, Ollie Hinkle. And they set up the Ollie Hinkle Heart Foundation. It's also the family that co-owns Olive and Oak, which is a very popular restaurant in Webster Groves. Yeah. And so anyway, she had said, we know that you have this desire to raise money for heart research, and your end goal is to protect what happened. You don't want what happened to your family to happen to other families, but you can do this also through other ways besides research, like funding new technologies that will make surgeries less invasive. And like if they had discovered through research that she needed a heart transplant, but there wasn't one available, these kind of things are like the next level of what can provide protection to those kids. And we were kind of like, yeah, we definitely could get behind that. So anyway, we ended up launching Ella's Umbrella. And as we were talking about it, we really realized that also the books and our ability to show up in these moments with people is a beautiful part of our daughter's legacy. And we wanted that to be reflected as well, kind of under this nonprofit. And I keep making kind of with my hands the sign of an umbrella, which is kind of how we arrived at the name. Like we're broadening what we're able to do. And there's also something really powerful about this idea of like, that you can't necessarily stop when it rains.
I was wondering that's one of the stories in the beginning of the book, is that it rained on your wedding day, and not just like a little rain, like
it was
a lot
like
of
cats
rain.
and dogs all dang day. It was not even cute.
It was not even cute.
So then you guys went out and got a bunch of umbrellas, I suppose, in anticipation of the fact that it was going to rain. And then, I wondered if that was also part of where the name for the nonprofit came from.
It's so funny. On our 10-year anniversary, I just shared a picture of us. It's one of my favorites from our wedding. And we're standing under this umbrella, and he's saying something that makes me laugh. And I just, it is even more poignant to look back at that and think, like, in the moment, that was the worst thing that I could have imagined, that it would pour rain all day on my wedding day. We wouldn't get one beautiful picture with the arch, even though we had a wedding in downtown St. Louis. And now my frame of reference is expanded, and I see that umbrella at our wedding is such a beautiful, powerful part of our story. But it didn't actually, that story didn't come into play when we were naming it. But I think it is just, I mean, there are all these silver linings and all these things that just kind of looking back and reflecting just make you smile. I mean,
that's amazing. That's beautiful. I mean, that's.
I'll have to show you the picture.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So if people want to get involved and
Donate
to the nonprofit or come to an event, can you tell us a little bit about how we would do that, or what events you guys have coming up?
Yeah, so we We have a cornhole tournament coming up. So every year for our trivia night, it is always the first weekend in April because we have it as it's kind of like a mashup between a birthday party and a fundraiser. And we sell out every year. And so this past year we were like, man, we need to keep looking for bigger venue space. And we thought, well, what if we also offer an alternative event, maybe in the fall?
Mm-hmm.
And so then that is what came up with. My husband is a master at cornhole. And so we're going to have a giant bags tournament, and that's going to be on September 29th. And we are so excited about it. I think it's going to be really fun. Just a fair warning, he is planning on playing
And winning.
and he's pretty awesome. Like
Try.
competitive. It won't be rigged, but he's going to be there in all of his glory.
I used to be better. We don't play as much as we used to.
Yeah, we've been a little busy, writing books and launching a nonprofit, but he's still pretty wicked good. And so that's going to be really fun. Yeah, right now, primarily the funding that we're getting is just coming through the events that we host.
Yep.
But there is like a donate link on the page, and the proceeds go towards the three things that I don't know that we articulated super well, but pediatric heart research, technology advancements for cardiac patients, and specifically pediatric cardiac patients, and then also help for grieving hearts, like just, coming alongside the brokenhearted with things like our books. And so...
Yeah, and the book, can be ordered on Amazon.
Yes, check them out on Amazon. And if you read them and don't mind giving us a review, that would be so helpful. That's I'm a marketer, and so I know that people really look at reviews and ratings before they purchase. So would highly encourage that. They're both on Amazon. We're just talking about also recording an audiobook. So maybe that will be available.
That's awesome.
Sometime as well.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us. And, it's been wonderful to get to know you guys. And I hope that your story and the way that you have processed moving through something so difficult can give hope and people can find comfort in that.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
We want to thank our guests, Betty and Kyle Mertens. We love our listeners and thank you all for staying with us on this journey. If you're interested in learning more about the nonprofit work that Betty and Kyle are doing, please visit ellasumbrella.org or find them on Instagram at Kyle and Betty. We encourage everyone to consider donating to Ella's Umbrella, supporting pediatric heart research. A link to donate can be found in the episode's description.
We welcome your comments and feedback. Reach out to us at atheist@stlpodcast.com. Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell and Trend Media STL.
Thank you for listening and keep looking for connection.